everyone! Today I'm working on a Valentine's YCH couples commission. I've always loved Valentine's Day. I think it's such a wonderful holiday celebrating the ones you love, and as a bonus, everything is pink and so cute. Since I've already done this sketch, this video will be line work and coloring with the final at the end, so come draw with me while I finish up this piece. YCH is short for your character here. Essentially, I'll draw a few compositions and the client chooses one of those preset poses for me to insert them or their character into that pose and format. For Valentine's Day 2025, I'm offering 6 different options, 4 for couples and 2 for singles. I always like including a few single character options for folks that want them. The one I'm working on right now has been the most popular option so far, but we've got a couple of weeks left until Valentine's, so we'll see how many of each I'll end up doing. YCH and similar commission offerings used to be super popular in the mid-2010s when DeviantArt and Tumblr were in their heydays, but I'm starting to see a resurgence in this type of commission work, which I think is really great and brings us back to our roots a little bit. YCH format commissions allow the artist to offer cheaper pieces than something a little more custom while still being paid a living wage, and the client gets some neat discounted art. It's a win-win. All artists like to format these a little bit differently, but I like to go ahead and line the bases I'm using ahead of time. This cuts down on total time and work needed for each piece, and I can always change facial structure or body type later on to match whoever I'm drawing if I need to. I find having the base pre-lined helps with keeping my sketches looking cleaner too, since the way that I sketch can get hard to read if the character I'm drawing has a lot of intricate details. I try not to erase too much during the sketch phase to keep my flow going unless it's absolutely necessary, and that definitely doesn't help how hectic my sketches can get. That's also part of the reason I like using different shades of pink for my sketches. When in the lining phase like I am here, it's a lot easier to tell exactly what I'm doing if a sketch is a different color from the color that I'm trying to use to line. Typically, I like to use black and then recolor the lines at the very end by using a clipping group on top of it all. The brush I use for sketching is the same brush I use for my line work. It's semi-transparent, and I do like my lines to be completely opaque, so when I'm done, I'll copy my line work layers all together to make them a little more solid. I also prefer lower stability in my brushes. I found it feels a lot closer to drawing on paper with the lowest stability your drawing tablet can handle. Higher stability is really difficult for me to work with since it feels like the movements and the strokes I'm making are less accurate, but maybe that's just a skill issue on my part. While we're on the topic of line work, you'll definitely see me undoing and redoing lines quickly, but you may also notice that if I draw a line that's kind of close, I'll just transform it to where I want instead of trying to draw it again differently. I'm using Paint Tool Sci V2, and while Koji, the creator and lone dev, has a lot on his plate at the moment in regards to updates and things like that, he has mentioned that both Puppet Warp and Liquify are on his to-do list as far as new features go, so I'm very excited about that. For now though, I'll have to stick to the regular 4-point transform tool, which gets the job done just fine, honestly. While Sci wasn't the first drawing program I ever used, it is the one that I've liked the best and stuck with the longest, upgrading from Sci 1 to Sci 2 in 2020. For all of the hype around other programs like Clip Studio and Procreate, I found that Sci has my favorite brush programming and the most realistic feeling of traditional media in a digital art program that I've ever tried. This isn't sponsored or anything, by the way, I just really love Sci. There aren't actually very many features I feel like I'm missing from Sci V2 versus other programs. Upgrading from the original program to V2 made a huge difference in the form of inclusions of the scatter brush, layer and selection blur, water fringe, all of which I use all of the time. I do see a lot of neat effects or tools in other programs, but I found that, at least for me, I like to keep things a little bit more simple. In a similar vein, a weird phenomenon I've been seeing online recently is the concept of art regression if the artist has chosen to simplify their style over time. While having a lot of detailing can be very visually impressive, a trap that a lot of beginner artists will fall into is adding too many details to cover for not knowing what they're doing. This presents itself most of the time as over-rendering, but can also be seen in adding a lot of unnecessary filler to illustrations. Too many filters or layer effects, lighting that doesn't make sense but has a lot of intricacies, sparkles, and similar things like that. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely did that too when I was first learning, and I still love a good sparkle, but I've come to appreciate a more simple style of working that's made my workflow a lot easier too. I used to have 5 to 6 different layers per color to shade each part, and that's just not necessary for me anymore. Instead, I'm a lot better at working with my colors to create something that still looks good, but also makes sense in as few layers as I can. In the case of the parts that I'm shading now, previously I would have a base color, then a cell shading layer, a gradient layer, a highlight layer, and sometimes other effects on top of all of that. Nowadays, I only have 2 working layers at a time. One for the base color and one for the shading. Occasionally, I'll have a few extra working layers when I need them, but to me that's a sign of me developing my art style in a way that I'm happy with. My workflow doesn't have to be something long, drawn out, or complex, and I'm perfectly happy with things being more simplified. It means I'm growing. I still love the look of cell shading complementing something more blended, so now I use a different brush that allows me to do all of that on just the one layer using pen pressure instead of additional bulk. Water fringe is also my best friend when I'm coloring pieces. It's a layer mode outside of the normal layer effects, which means you can toggle it it alongside your blended modes, and it gives the filled area on that layer an outline of the same color that you're using, but just darker. The prominence of this outline is based on the opacity of the fill, so by using a brush that's a little more transparent and linking the transparency to my pen pressure, I can control the harshness of the fill line too. Similarly, I can use my blur brush to soften that line, meaning I can do all of my rendering work on one layer instead of trying to split it up so much. This way is also a lot less rigid for me, and I can push the balance between hard shadows and soften areas more than when I was putting myself in lots of little boxes, or layers in this case. Anyway, what I'm really trying to say is that art regression doesn't exist. You'll continue to improve over time with experience, and although that improvement isn't always a straight line, you'll become better at whatever it is you love to do. Simplification doesn't always mean getting rid of all detail either. It could be finding a tool that suits you better, or a different way of drawing altogether that's less physical strain. Don't let anyone get in your head about it and get you down, and you'll be just fine. I get comments a lot, especially over on TikTok, asking how I learned to draw, and the answer is over 20 years of consistent practice. People don't like that answer, understandably, but there really isn't a get better at drawing now with zero practice with this one simple trick scheme at all. It takes consistency, time, and dedication. I didn't have the internet exposure from a very young age that kids do now. Like, I remember when Instagram's icon was the brown camera with the rainbow and social media was a hot new thing and everybody wanted to be on Facebook. I studied a lot of animal and insect encyclopedias, nature magazines, art books, manga, anything that I could get my hands on to copy and study how things move and work together, from lighting to posing to color theory. I looked everywhere for inspiration, especially ways that other artists were interpreting things, and I still do. Other artists are such a valuable resource in knowledge and new perspectives, and there are more artists than ever before that are accessible because of the internet. And I'm not just talking about whoever's in your niche either. There's a lot of valuable info and inspiration that can be shared by everyone that does art, and you're closing yourself off to a lot of really beautiful work if you don't also follow artists that do different things than you do. For example, I primarily work in 2D illustration, but there are so many sculpture artists I follow and love, as well as rug makers, fursuit makers, sewists, scrapbookers, junk journalers, and more that inspire me daily, and I can only hope that I can inspire people outside of my field as well. There are so many small artists that I would have never known existed without the internet, and I think that's amazing that we're able to find community like this too. The bonus that artists have nowadays is that a tutorial on just about anything can be found within a few clicks, and you can have that focused study without having to come up with all of that on your own. There are so many passionate young artists out there who are leaps and bounds ahead of where I was at their age because of the wonderful resource that is the internet, and that's great. Studying is a lot more about dissecting and breaking down things to their simplest processes though. Draw what you see, not what you know was a common phrase that my dad would say to me when I was younger. This just means not to let your knowledge get in the way of what you're trying to learn. We all know that the ocean is blue, for example, but why is that? And is it really? Water itself is clear, but the ocean has so many different things in it that change your color perception, and on top of that, the water reflects the blue of the sky as well. Really look at a photo of the ocean, and instead of telling yourself that it's just blue, erase all of that knowledge that you think you had and really study it. There are spots where there's a deeper tinge of ultramarine, or teal, or green, and the little wavelets reflect light just so you can see the sparkles and reflections in the water. You really have to look at everything through an entirely different perspective like that, and I feel like that's what a lot of beginner artists might be missing. You have to learn how to see before you can learn how to draw, and that's something that's always been true. All of that being said, learning all of these rules only gets you so far. You also need to learn how to push those boundaries of reality and bend the rules to your whim, and exactly how you do that will manifest in your own style. Your style isn't just the way you draw, but also the way you see and interpret what you experience around you. You'll develop both your eye and your skills with practice, and although sometimes the visible improvement will be slow, you'll continue to learn with time. Coming back to what I'm actually drawing here for a bit, one of my favorite parts of the drawing process is adding the extra little finishing details to complete a piece. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not hard to go a little overboard with detailing, and I do find myself having to rein it in occasionally, but that's alright. That's what Control Z is for. Other programs may have an automatically generating gradient map, but Psy doesn't, so I opt to do it my own way here. The cool colors go in the shadows, and the warm colors go where I want the light to be coming from. The transition colors are there to help everything go together smoothly. All of these get blended together in a custom gradient map, then I'll then put on a shade and shine layer. This layer mode tells the program to intensify the lights to be brighter and the shadows darker, and this also helps color correct a little bit over the entire piece. Thank you to everyone who has gotten this far. Let me know if you have any questions for me or suggestions on what to do next. I stepped away from long-form content a while back, and it's been a little difficult for me to come up with something to talk about for over a minute now, let alone 10 times that, so if you have any input on topics, tutorials, or other content you'd like to see, similar things like that, I'd love to know. For now though, if you'd like a piece like this for yourself, or if you'd like to see my other work, I have all of my info on my website linked in the description. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon.